Clara Whitcomb pressed the eviction notice flat against her chest so her hands would stop shaking. She had crossed 4 states to marry a man she had never met. Not for love, not yet, but for a life she could finally call her own. Now she stood in the dust of Red Hollow, New Mexico, and the man she had come for was bleeding, surrounded, and telling her to leave. She did not leave. She reached for his ledger instead. And by the 3rd page, she understood exactly why they needed her gone. If this story moves you, subscribe to this channel and follow Clara's fight all the way to the end. Drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. The stagecoach lurched to a stop at 11:42 in the morning, and Clara Whitcomb was the only passenger who did not exhale with relief. She sat perfectly still for 3 full seconds, her hands folded over the small leather satchel in her lap, her back straight despite 8 hours of rattling road and a broken spring beneath the left seat that had been bruising her hip since before dawn. The other passengers, a hardware salesman, a young couple from Ohio, and a heavy-set man who had slept through most of Wyoming, all began gathering their things with the loose, unguarded energy of people who knew exactly where they were going. Clara knew where she was going. She was simply not certain what she would find when she arrived. She stepped down from the coach onto the main street of Red Hollow, New Mexico territory, and the first thing she noticed was the paper. It was nailed to the post beside the depot door, a large official-looking document with thick black ink and the seal of the First Territorial Bank of Red Hollow printed at the top. She would have walked right past it if the words had not caught her eye the moment her boot touched the ground. Notice of land seizure, Mercer Ranch, effective sundown, June 14th, 1879. Clara stopped. She read it once. Then she read it again. Then she turned slowly and looked across the street. She had never seen Caleb Mercer before. She had only a letter 2 pages written in careful, deliberate handwriting that suggested a man who chose his words because words did not come easily to him. He had described himself as 34 years old, owner of a working cattle ranch, in need of a capable woman, willing to build something real rather than something comfortable. He had not promised much. He had promised nothing false. That more than anything was why Clara had answered. But the man she was looking at now was not waiting with a wagon and a polite, awkward greeting. He was standing in the middle of the road with blood drying on the collar of his shirt, a cut above his left eye that had not been cleaned, and 2 men flanking him on either side, both of them wearing the kind of flat, deliberate expressions that come from men who have been paid to stand somewhere and make sure another man does not leave. He was holding a ledger under his arm, like a man holds something he is not ready to surrender. Clara watched him for a moment. Then she picked up her traveling bag, crossed the street, and walked directly toward him. "Mr. Mercer," she said. He turned. His eyes, dark, tired, carrying the particular weight of a man who has been fighting something invisible for too long, moved from her face to the bag in her hand to her face again. He did not tip his hat. He did not smile. He said in a voice that was low and not unkind, but carrying the blunt edge of a man trying to protect someone he did not yet know. "Miss Whitcomb, you need to get back on that coach." "The coach has already gone," she said. "Then you need to find a room at the hotel and arrange passage on the next one. Tomorrow morning. I'll pay for it." He paused. "I'll find a way to pay for it." Clara looked at the 2 men standing beside him. Neither of them spoke. Neither of them moved. "Are these men employed by the bank?" she asked. "They're employed by Silas Pritchard," Caleb said, "which is the same thing." "I see." She looked back at him. "And the notice on the depot wall, land seizure at sundown. Is that also Mr. Pritchard? Miss Whitcomb? Is it?" Caleb held her gaze for a long moment. Something in his expression shifted, not softening exactly, but adjusting the way a man adjusts when he realizes the person in front of him is not going to be managed. "Yes," he said. "The bank holds my note. Pritchard holds the bank. By tonight, I may not have a ranch to my name." He said it flatly without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. "So, you understand why I'm telling you to leave?" "I understand why you're telling me," she said. "That's not the same as me agreeing." She looked at the ledger under his arm. Is that your accounts book? He glanced down at it like he had forgotten it was there. It's everything I have. Every bill, every payment, every note I signed. It doesn't matter. The numbers don't come out right no matter how many times I go through them, and I cannot. He stopped, set his jaw. I cannot make the language of it work the way they say it works, and Pritchard knows it. Clara held out her hand. He looked at her hand. He looked at her face. The two men beside him exchanged a glance. You came a long way, Caleb said quietly, to get back on a coach tomorrow. Give me the ledger, Mr. Mercer. He gave her the ledger. She opened it, standing there in the street, the sun overhead, and the dust moving around her boots, and not one person in Red Hollow saying a word, because something in the way she stood perfectly still, completely unhurried, like a woman who had done this 100 times, made the entire scene hold its breath. The first page was a list of loan terms. She read it. The second page was a record of payments. She read it. The third page was a column of interest calculations hand-tabulated in neat figures, and Clara read that page twice. Then she looked up. Mr. Mercer, she said, when did you make your payment in March 14th, he said. I have the receipt. And the bank recorded it as March 22nd. A beat of silence. That's 8 days, she said. 8 days on a note at this interest rate. She ran her finger down the column. Adds $37 in penalty charges. Did anyone explain that to you? The bank clerk told me the payment was late. Your receipt says March 14th. I know what my receipt says. Do you have it with you? I have everything with me. I've been carrying everything with me for 6 weeks because I knew... He stopped. Started again. I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't find the word for what it was. Clara closed the ledger and looked at him directly. The word she said is fraud. One of the men beside Caleb took a small step forward. His hand moved toward his belt. Caleb's entire body went still in a way that had nothing to do with fear. The stillness of a man who is calculating exactly how much damage he can do before the second man gets involved. Clara did not move. I would not, she said pleasantly to the man who had stepped forward. Do whatever you are considering doing in the middle of a public street in front of at least... She glanced around without urgency. 11 witnesses. Mr. Pritchard's arrangement works best when things stay quiet. I suspect he would prefer it remain that way. The man did not step back, but he did not step forward again either. Caleb looked at her with an expression she could not quite name, something between astonishment and the first fragile edge of hope, which in her experience was the most dangerous thing a person could feel when they had been without it for a long time. You read accounts, he said. My father was a bookkeeper in Philadelphia for 31 years. I kept his books from the time I was 14. She held up the ledger. This is not complicated mathematics, Mr. Mercer. This is deliberate confusion dressed up as mathematics. There is a difference. And you can tell that from 3 pages. I can tell it from 3 pages. I will need all of them to prove it. He was quiet for a moment. Why? He said. Why would you? You don't know me. You came here to... He seemed to struggle with what exactly she had come there for. You came here for a life, not a fight. I came here, Clara said carefully, because I was tired of living in places where what I could do was treated as less important than what I looked like doing it. I answered your letter because you said you needed a capable woman. You did not say capable of what specifically. You left that open. She looked at him steadily. So, are you going to stand in this road arguing with me? Or are we going to go somewhere I can look at the rest of these numbers? They went to the ranch. The 2 men from the bank followed them to the edge of town, then stopped. Clara did not look back at them. She sat beside Caleb on the wagon bench with the ledger in her lap and her traveling bag at her feet, and the first 10 minutes of the ride passed without either of them speaking, because they were both for different reasons recalibrating. Finally Caleb said, You're not what I expected. What did you expect? Someone quieter. I am quiet, Clara said. I was very quiet, right up until there was a reason not to be. He glanced sideways at her. You weren't afraid of those men. I was afraid of those men, she said. Being afraid and being stopped by being afraid are two separate things. Another silence. The road stretched out ahead of them, dry and gold in the afternoon light. The letter you sent me, Clara said. You wrote that the ranch was struggling. You wrote that times had been hard, but you didn't write that you were about to lose it. No, he admitted. Why not? He took his time answering. Because if I'd written that, you wouldn't have come. You don't know that. Maybe not, but I wasn't willing to risk it. He kept his eyes on the road. I've had this land for 11 years. My father worked it before me. It's not much to look at, and I know that. But he stopped. It's the one thing in my life I have not let go of. And I was starting to believe I was going to lose it anyway. Not because of anything I did wrong, but because I couldn't figure out the trap fast enough. Clara looked down at the ledger. Tell me, she said, about the first time the bank changed something without telling you. And he told her. All of it. He talked for the better part of an hour about the original loan he had taken out 4 years ago to get through a bad winter, about the payment schedule that had seemed steep but manageable, about the first strange entry he had noticed 18 months later when a payment he had made in full appeared in the ledger as partial. He had gone to the bank. The clerk had shown him a column of numbers. He had not understood the column of numbers. He had been made to feel quietly and professionally, and without anyone raising their voice, that this was a personal failing, that a man who could not follow basic financial calculation had no business questioning figures set down by people who understood these things. And so you stopped questioning, Clara said. I stopped questioning, and that's when they knew they had you. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The ranch was smaller than the letter had suggested, but it was well kept in the way that working places kept by working people tend to be not beautiful, not curated, but functional and honest, with fences in repair, and the barn sound, and a vegetable garden along the south wall of the house that told her someone here understood the value of not depending on a store. She did not comment on any of it. She went inside, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the ledger to page 1. Caleb brought her coffee without being asked. She noted that and moved on. By the time the light outside had turned orange, she had gone through 46 pages and made her own set of notations on a separate sheet of paper she had taken from her bag. She had a method her father had taught her, that a clean set of numbers was its own argument, required no raising of the voice, permitted no misreading. And she worked through the Mercer accounts with the same focused quiet she had used on every set of books she had touched since she was 14 years old. Caleb sat across from her for a while watching. Then he got up and put something on the stove. The smell of it, coffee first, then beans, then something with salt pork, moved through the kitchen, and Clara registered it distantly, the way you register warmth when you are concentrating. At some point, he set a plate in front of her without saying anything. She ate without looking up. How bad, he said finally. She set down her pencil. The original debt, she said. When you signed the note 4 years ago, how much was it? $240. And how much have you paid back in total across all your payments? He thought. 310, maybe 315. You have paid back more than you borrowed, Clara said. By my count, you have overpaid by $73 and some cents. You do not owe this bank anything. The bank owes you. He stared at her. That is not possible, he said. It is not only possible, it is documented, right here. She turned the ledger to face him and put her finger on a line of figures. This entry, March of 1877. You see this number? Yes. That is a penalty charge for early repayment. Silas Pritchard's bank charges a fee if you pay ahead of schedule. Did anyone explain that to you when you signed the note? No. Of course not. Because if you had known, you would not have tried to pay ahead. You were trying to get out from under the debt. He charged you for trying. She moved her finger down. This entry, August of the same year. This is a compound interest recalculation retroactive applied to the penalty charge. He charged interest on the penalty. Then, she moved her finger again. March 1878. He charged a fee for the recalculation itself, an administrative cost, $12. He charged me for charging me. Yes. Caleb sat back. His hands were flat on the table, and he was looking at them. She could see what it cost him to sit still. Caleb, she said. And it was the first time she had used his given name, and she did it because he needed to hear it. Said in a human voice, rather than a formal one. Listen to me. This is not your failure. This is a system that was designed to be too complicated to question. They used language the way some men use fences to keep people on the side where they're easiest to manage. I should have understood it, he said very low. I should have. No. She said it firmly, not harshly, but firmly. You're a rancher. You understand land and cattle and weather and the 1,000 ways a year can go wrong that have nothing to do with a man's quality. They built this trap out of paper because they knew that honest men who work with their hands are too tired at the end of the day to fight with a ledger. That's not your failure. That's their strategy. He looked up. You're angry, he said like it surprised him. I am furious, she said simply. But fury without direction is just noise. So let me finish. She turned back to the ledger. She worked until the lamp was low. He did not ask her to stop, and she did not stop because stopping felt like a form of surrender, and she had not traveled this far to surrender at a kitchen table in New Mexico. At some point, she heard him moving around the house, banking the fire, checking the door, doing the small evening tasks of a man alone who has made his habits so automatic they require no thought. And then the house went quiet, and she looked up and found him sitting across from her again. Not reading, not doing anything in particular, just there. Present. Like a man who has been alone long enough that the presence of another person in the same room has its own value separate from conversation. You should sleep, he said. Whatever you're thinking of doing, and I can see you're thinking of something it'll keep till morning. I'm thinking of writing letters. Tonight. The Territorial Marshal's office in Santa Fe. The Land Recorder's office. Possibly the circuit judge in Albuquerque, if this judge here is as dirty as I suspect. She looked up. Are there other ranchers? Other people in this county who've lost land, or who are in the same position you are? He was quiet for a moment. Yes. How many? Another pause. More than 12. That I know of. Clara nodded slowly. Then this is bigger than your ranch. Miss Whitcomb. Clara. He stopped. Clara, you understand what you'd be doing. If Pritchard finds out what you're looking at, he already knows I looked at your ledger in the middle of the street. He's going to find out I'm here. She met his eyes. So we don't have the luxury of being careful about whether we start. We only get to choose how. He held her gaze for a long time. You said you were tired of places where what you could do didn't matter, he said. Yes. Red Hollow is not going to be easy on you. I didn't come here for easy. No, Caleb said quiet, as a man who has just understood something he should have seen sooner. I don't reckon you did. He got up, poured her the last of the coffee, and set it beside her without ceremony. The widow's name is Martha Oates, he said. Lives 6 miles east. Lost her place last fall. He went toward the door to the back room, then stopped. The vaquero's name is Domingo Reyes. Best cowhand I ever worked with. Pritchard's bank told him his wage records had been miscalculated and docked him 4 months' pay. He left the county. I don't know where he went. I'll find him, Clara said. Caleb stood in the doorway. She could not read the expression on his face and did not try. Some things deserved to stay private until a person was ready to name them. Good night, Miss Whitcomb, he said. Good night, Mr. Mercer, she said. And she turned back to the ledger, and the lamp burned low, and outside the night moved across Red Hollow like it did not yet know what was coming. She did not sleep until she had written 3 letters, one to the Territorial Marshal, one to the Land Recorder, one to a lawyer in Albuquerque she had read about in a Philadelphia newspaper 2 years ago, a man who had taken a foreclosure case against a territorial bank, and one on a technicality involving forged interest calculations. She sealed each one carefully. She addressed them in her best hand. Then she sat back and looked at what she had. $73 overpaid. 12 families at minimum. A banker who owned the judge and the sheriff and the understanding of every man in town that the numbers were simply how numbers worked, and that asking questions was a sign of ignorance rather than intelligence. And one rancher with a split lip and honest hands and 11 years of work they were trying to take from him before sundown tomorrow. Clara folded her hands on top of the ledger. She had come to Red Hollow to build something. She had not known until this afternoon what that thing would be. Now she knew. She blew out the lamp and sat in the dark for a moment, and the dark was very quiet, and she was not afraid. She was gone before he woke up. Caleb came into the kitchen at first light and found the table empty, the ledger gone, and a note in her handwriting propped against the coffee tin. 3 lines, no preamble. Gone to town. Do not follow. Feed the horses. He stood there holding the note for longer than he needed to. Then he fed the horses. She came back 2 hours later with mud on her boots, 3 envelopes no longer in her possession, and the name of a woman she intended to visit before noon. Martha Oates, Clara said, setting her bag on the table and pulling out a fresh sheet of paper. The widow you mentioned. Does she still have her deed paperwork? I don't know. She lost the place last October. I haven't... He paused. I haven't been able to look her in the eye since then. Felt like something I should have stopped. You couldn't have stopped it without knowing what you know now. Clara sat down. Where is she living? She's at her sister's place on the East Road. Took in laundry. She was running 40 head of cattle this time last year. He said it with the flat, careful voice of a man who has learned to report a thing rather than feel it while speaking, because feeling it while speaking makes it too difficult to get through. I need to go see her. She may not want to talk. She may not, but I'm going to ask anyway. Clara looked up at him. Are you coming? He was quiet for half a second. Yeah, he said. I'm coming. Martha Oates answered the door. The way women who have lost things answer doors, not afraid exactly, but braced like she was waiting for the next piece of bad news to arrive with a polite knock. She was somewhere past 60, with strong hands and a face that had been through weather and kept its shape anyway. She looked at Caleb first, then at Clara, then at the leather satchel Clara was carrying. Caleb Mercer, she said. You still standing? Still standing, he said. They set your auction for sundown. I know. And this is... Clara Whitcomb, Clara said. I came to marry Mr. Mercer and found a problem I'd like to help solve if you'll let me. I've been going through his accounts. I believe what happened to your ranch may be the same thing that happened to his. Martha looked at her for a long moment. Then she looked back at Caleb. She always talked this direct. Since the moment I met her, Caleb said. Martha stepped back from the door. Come in then. She had kept everything. That was the first thing Clara understood about Martha Oates. The woman was not sentimental, but she was thorough. Every bill, every receipt, every letter from the bank printed on that thick official cream-colored paper that was designed, Clara had always thought, to make its contents feel more permanent and authoritative than they had any right to. She spread them on the kitchen table, and Clara went through them the way she had gone through Caleb's the night before, with the same focused quiet and the same separate sheet of paper for her own notations. Martha sat across from her, with her hands around a coffee cup, and watched. You know what you're looking at, she said after about 10 minutes. I do. The bank sent 3 different men to explain those numbers to me. All 3 of them talked to me like I was a child who'd gotten into something I didn't understand. I know. The last one, the young clerk, maybe 20 years old, he actually patted my hand. Martha's voice did not change. I told him if he touched me again, I'd use that hand to write a letter to every rancher in this county about what Silas Pritchard's bank does to a widow who can't make the math add up the way they say it should. Clara looked up. What did he do? He left very fast. A pause. Didn't help, of course. They took the ranch anyway, but it felt good. Clara almost smiled. Mrs. Oates, your original loan, do you remember the amount? $180. 1875. Good year, I thought. Prices were up. My husband had just passed and I needed to carry the note through winter and into spring. I had the cattle. I had the land. I thought I had what I needed. And your payments. 14 months of them. On time. Every one. Martha set down her coffee cup. Then my husband's name appeared on a second note I had never seen, signed after he died. Clara's hand stopped moving. What? A second promissory note, dated November 1875. My husband died in September. Martha's voice was perfectly level. Silas Pritchard told me my husband had arranged additional credit before his passing, and that the signature had simply been processed late. He said this with a very straight face. Caleb, who had been standing against the wall listening, said quietly, "I didn't know that." "I didn't tell anyone," Martha said, "because who was I going to tell the judge in this county as Pritchard's brother-in-law? The sheriff's been on Pritchard's payroll since before my husband was alive. And I'm a widow with no sons and—" She stopped, looked at her hands. And people have a way of not seeing what they don't want to look at. Clara put down her pencil. "Mrs. Oates," she said carefully, "do you still have that second note? The one with your husband's name?" Martha got up. She went to the back room and came back with a tin box. She set it on the table, opened it, and took out a folded piece of paper like she had known exactly where it was for 3 years and had been waiting for a reason to show it to someone. Clara unfolded it. She read it. Then she read it again. "Caleb," she said. "Yeah. Come look at this." He came. He looked. He was not an expert in financial documents, but he had spent enough time with his own ledger in the last 6 weeks that he had learned to recognize certain things, and what he was looking at now was the way a man signs his name when he is signing it himself versus the way a signature looks when someone else has made it. "That's not right," he said. "No," Clara said. "It is not right at all." Martha watched them both. "Is it enough?" she said. "Is it something that does anything besides make me angry?" "It is evidence of forgery," Clara said, "which makes this not just fraud, but criminal fraud." She looked up at Martha directly. "And I have already sent a letter to the territorial marshal in Santa Fe this morning. I sent it before I came here, which means that what you've just shown me needs to go into a second letter." "You sent a letter before you knew about this." "I sent a letter because what I found in Caleb's ledger last night was enough to warrant one. What you've just shown me is enough to warrant 10. Clara began folding the document carefully. "May I take this?" Martha looked at her for a long time. The look was not suspicious. It was the look of a woman calibrating, measuring something she could not quite name yet but needed to trust. "What makes you think you can do what lawyers couldn't?" Martha said. "What makes you think some woman with a satchel can walk into this town and undo what Silas Pritchard has been building for 15 years? "Nothing makes me think it will be easy," Clara said. "But I have documentation of a forged signature on a promissory note. I have falsified interest entries across at least 2 separate accounts, and by the end of today, I intend to have more." She held Martha's gaze. "I can't promise you get your ranch back. I want to be honest with you about that. Some of what's been taken may be gone for good, but I can promise that if there is a way to put Silas Pritchard in front of a territorial judge with this evidence, I will find it. And I will be standing at that auction platform at sundown today with everything I have, whether it's enough or not." Martha Oates looked at her for another long moment. Then she looked at Caleb. "You marry this woman," Martha said, "before somebody else figures out what she's worth." Caleb looked at the floor. "Working on it," he said. They left Martha's with the forged note, a signed statement she wrote out in her own hand, and the name of a man Clara had not heard before. Elias Beaumont, a homesteader who had sold a parcel of land to a neighboring rancher 2 years ago, except that according to Martha, Elias Beaumont had been dead for 6 months before the sale went through. "Dead man sold land," Caleb said flatly on the road back toward town. His signature appeared on the deed transfer, Clara said. Which means someone in the county recorder's office either didn't notice or was paid not to notice. Or both. Or both, she agreed. Clara. He said her name the way he was starting to say it, not formally, not carefully, but with the slight weight of a man who has decided a word belongs in his regular vocabulary. We have 4 hours until sundown. The auction starts at 5. Whatever you're planning to do with all of this, I need to find Domingo Reyes. I told you last night he left the county. You said you didn't know where he went. That's not the same as gone. She looked at him. Who would know? Who was he closest to in this area? Caleb thought. Old Pete Harmon runs the livery stable on the south end of town. Pete and Domingo played cards together every Friday for years. Then we go to Pete Harmon. Clara, we have 4 hours, which is enough time if we move now and stop discussing whether we have enough time. He looked at her sideways. You always been like this. Like what? Like a woman who's already 3 steps ahead of the conversation she's in. Yes, she said simply. It took me a long time to stop apologizing for it. He didn't say anything to that, but something in his expression shifted in the way things shift when a person hears something they recognize from the inside, something they have felt themselves without having the words for it. Pete Harmon was a small, leathery man with the particular kind of wariness that comes from running a livery stable in a town where too many people owe each other too much. He looked at Caleb and Clara the way he looked at most things, like he was already calculating the fastest way out of whatever this was. You looking for Domingo? Pete said. It wasn't a question. I need to know if you have a way to reach him, Clara said. I'm not looking to bring him trouble. I'm looking to give him a way to address the trouble that was brought to him. Ma'am, with respect, that sounds real nice. But Domingo Reyes left this county because staying in it was going to get him hurt. He lost 4 months' wages to that bank's bookkeeping, and when he went to argue it, Pritchard's man told him if he kept making noise, his work papers were going to have some problems. You understand what that means for a Mexican man in a territory like this. I understand exactly what it means, Clara said. Which is why I need his name on a sworn statement and why I need to tell him that what happened to him is documented alongside what happened to a dozen other people in this county, and that when this goes in front of a territorial marshal, it won't be one man's word against a bank. It'll be a pattern. Patterns are harder to bury than people. Pete studied her for a long time. His eyes moved to Caleb. She for real, he said. She's been up since before I was, Caleb said. Pete chewed the inside of his cheek. Domingo's in Cimarron, working at a freight outfit. I got an address. He paused. I'll write it down for you, but I want you to understand something. That man worked this land for 9 years. He was the best hand in this county, and Pritchard's people treated him like he was less than the paper his contract was written on. If you go to him with this, and it doesn't come to anything, then he's no worse off than he is now, Clara said. I know. I'm not asking him to risk anything he hasn't already lost. I'm asking him to let me try. Pete got up and went to the back. He came back with an address written on a torn piece of paper. He held it out, then held it a second longer before letting go. You know what Pritchard's gonna do when he finds out you've been going around talking to people today? He's going to be angry, Clara said. He's gonna be more than angry. He's got men who do more than stand in the road. I know. And that doesn't... He stopped. You ain't afraid. I am afraid, she said. But the auction is at sundown, and being afraid doesn't move any faster than being brave. Pete let go of the paper. Ma. She wrote the letter to Domingo Reyes at the hotel writing desk, standing up with Caleb leaning in the doorway watching the street. She wrote it in 20 minutes, plain language, no courtroom formality, just the facts as she had found them, and what she intended to do with them, and what she was asking him if he was willing to add his voice to. She handed it to the hotel clerk to post express. It would not reach Cimarron before sundown. She knew that. But the marshal's process would take longer than one afternoon. And if this thing grew into what she believed it could become, she needed Domingo Reyes' statement eventually. She was playing a longer game than the next 4 hours. She was playing all of it at once. Caleb seemed to understand this without being told. "The auction today," he said when they were back on the street. "Even with what you have, the forged note, the interest falsifications, Pritchard controls the judge. He controls who talks and who doesn't." "He controls who talks in his courtroom," Clara said. "He does not control the middle of a public street." Caleb looked at her. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking that the auction platform is a public space. I'm thinking that 12 families in this county have been robbed by the same method, and most of them don't know yet that other families were robbed the same way. I'm thinking—" She paused. "That there is a widow in this town who was told her dead husband signed a loan note 6 weeks after his burial, and that story told aloud in public in front of the men who did it is the kind of thing that changes what a crowd is willing to accept. You're going to stand up at the auction and say all of this. I'm going to stand up at the auction and say all of this. Pritchard has a sheriff. Pritchard has a sheriff who has been watching this county rob its people for 15 years and has not stopped it, which means either he agreed to it or he was too afraid to stop it. I am betting," she said, "on afraid, because afraid men, when the crowd shifts, shift with it." Caleb was quiet. Then, "And if the crowd doesn't shift," Clara met his eyes, "then we lose the ranch today, and I spend the next 6 months making sure every person in the New Mexico territory who can read a newspaper knows what happened in Red Hollow on June 14, 1879. He held her gaze. "You planned all of this," he said. "Last night, while I thought you were just reading ledgers." "I was reading ledgers," she said, "and I was planning. Those things are not mutually exclusive." "No," he said slowly. "I reckon they're not." He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, put the hat back on. She was beginning to understand what he did when he was working through something that had a lot of weight to it. "There's something else," he said. "Tell me. Thomas Beaumont, Elias Beaumont's son. He lives in town. He's been trying to get someone to listen to him about his father's deed for 2 years. Nobody will touch it. The county recorder's office told him the signature was witnessed and legitimate. He knows it's not. He just can't prove it to anyone who has any power to do something about it." Clara stared at him. "You've known about Thomas Beaumont for 2 years. I didn't know it connected to anything else. I thought it was just one bad thing, one crooked deal. I didn't know it was a pattern until you started pulling the thread last night. Where is he, Thomas Beaumont? Where is he right now?" "Hardware store. He works there." Clara was already moving. Thomas Beaumont was 26 years old with his father's hands and his father's stubbornness, and 3 years of quiet contained fury that had nowhere to go. He listened to Clara for 4 minutes without saying a word. When she was done, he said, "You can prove the signature is forged. I can demonstrate significant inconsistency between it and your father's authenticated signature on the original deed. The Territorial Marshal's Office has forensic examiners. Combined with the timeline your father's death preceding the note by 6 months, yes, I believe it can be proven." "I went to a lawyer in Santa Fe," Thomas said. "He told me the case wasn't worth his time. The case alone from one family may not have been. 12 families is a different thing." He looked at Caleb. "You trust her?" Caleb considered. "I trust what she's done in the last 18 hours, that's all I can tell you." "That's more than I've gotten from anyone in 3 years." Thomas looked back at Clara. "What do you need from me?" "A signed statement. Everything you know about the deed, transfer the date, the amount, the circumstances, what your father told you about his financial situation before he died, and anything you witnessed afterward." "I can write that. I need it in the next 2 hours." "Then I'll write it now." She had by 3 in the afternoon 4 signed statements, 1 forged promissory note, 3 separate sets of falsified interest calculations across different accounts, and the original loan contract. Caleb's father had signed 22 years ago. A document she had found in a tin box at the bottom of Caleb's closet that morning before he woke, which she had slipped into her satchel quietly because she had a feeling about it, and the feeling had been right. The original contract had a clause. Small, buried in the third paragraph of the second page, written in language designed to be skimmed rather than read. The clause stated in plain terms that the note holder retained the right to negotiate outstanding debt through arbitration prior to seizure proceedings, which meant that the seizure notice nailed to the depot door that morning was not just premature, it was illegal. Clara stood in the hotel room she had rented with the last of her travel money and spread everything across the bed and looked at what she had. Caleb stood in the doorway. "It's enough to challenge the seizure," she said. "The original contract has an arbitration clause they skipped. They can't legally seize the property without offering arbitration first. That alone stops today's auction." He was very still. "Temporarily," she said. "It stops it temporarily. It gives us time to get the marshal here and build the full case, but it stops it today." "And Pritchard? Pritchard will be furious. He'll come at us another way. We have to be ready for that." "Clara." His voice was very quiet. "Are you sure about this?" "About the law. About all of it. About standing up in front of that man with those people around him and—" He stopped. "Because once you do it, you can't undo it. He'll know who you are and what you have. And I need you to be certain, because if something happens to you because of this—" "Caleb." She turned to face him. "Look at what's on this bed. A widow whose dead husband was made to sign a paper. A man who was run out of the county for complaining about stolen wages. A young man who spent 3 years being told his father's name was used to cheat his family, and nobody cared. And you 11 years of work being handed to a banker who never broke a sweat taking it." She held his gaze. "I am going to that platform, with or without you beside me. And I would rather have you beside me, because you know these people and they know you. But I am going." He stood in the doorway. The light was getting lower. Sundown was coming. He nodded. Once. Slowly. "Then let's go," he said, "before I think about it long enough to get sensible." She gathered everything into the satchel. Every page, every statement, every number. Outside Red Hollow was filling up. The auction crowd was starting to form. And somewhere on the other side of that crowd, Silas Pritchard was already smiling, because as far as he knew, today was already settled, already won, already done. He did not yet know about the arbitration clause. He did not yet know about Martha Oates's tin box. He did not yet know that Clara Whitcomb had been awake since before sunrise, moving through his town like water finding every crack in the stone. By sundown he would. The crowd had gathered, the way crowds always gather for a foreclosure auction in a small town. Not with joy, not exactly, but with the particular uncomfortable energy of people who have come to watch something inevitable happen and are not sure how they feel about watching it. Clara felt their eyes before she heard their voices. She and Caleb came down the main street together at 4:47 in the afternoon, her satchel over her shoulder, his hat pulled low, and the crowd parted around them, the way water parts around something. It cannot move, not because they were respected, not yet, but because something in the way they walked together told the people watching that this was not the walk of a man coming to surrender. Silas Pritchard was already on the auction platform. He was exactly what his letters sounded like, a broad man in his 50s, clean-shaven, with the kind of deliberate tidiness that announces money more effectively than jewelry ever could. He stood with his hands clasped behind his back and his chin slightly elevated, and when he saw Caleb coming through the crowd, his expression did not change. He had the particular stillness of a man who has won so many times that he has stopped expecting to lose. He had not seen Clara yet. She stayed half a step behind Caleb's shoulder. Not hiding. Watching. Sheriff Dale Connors stood at the base of the platform steps, a heavy-set man, with a badge that caught the late afternoon sun, and a face that was working very hard at looking like it belonged to someone who had made peace with the things it had allowed to happen. He saw Caleb and straightened slightly. "Mercer," he said. "Don't make this ugly." "Not planning to," Caleb said. "Good. Pritchard's already got the paperwork filed. This doesn't need to go bad." "Sheriff," Caleb stopped, looked at him directly. "You've known me 11 years. You knew my father before that. You know what this land is to me." Connors said nothing. I'm not asking you to stop anything, Caleb said. I'm asking you to listen. For the next 10 minutes, that's all. Caleb. 10 minutes, Dale. The sheriff looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked at Clara, who had moved to Caleb's side and was watching the sheriff with the calm, precise attention of a woman who has already decided what she will do regardless of what he answers. Connors looked away. He didn't say yes. He didn't move either. Clara took that for what it was. She went up the platform steps without asking permission. That was the first thing that changed the air in the crowd, not the fact that a woman stepped up, but the way she did it. Unhurried, certain, like she had every right and was not interested in debating the point. Silas Pritchard turned. He looked at her. His expression went through 3 changes in about 2 seconds. Mild curiosity, recognition of something unfamiliar, and then the particular sharpening that happens when a powerful man realizes someone has entered a space he considered already controlled. This platform, he said pleasantly, is for bank business. I know, Clara said. I have some. Ma'am, I don't believe we've met. Clara Whitcomb. I arrived on yesterday's coach. She set her satchel on the edge of the auctioneer's table and opened it. I've been reviewing the financial accounts of Mercer Ranch since last night. I have some questions about the methodology. Pritchard smiled. It was the smile of a man who has had a very long time to practice making power look like patience. Miss Whitcomb, this is a legal proceeding under territorial bank law. It is not a valid proceeding, Clara said, and her voice was level and clear and carried across the crowd without her raising it even slightly. Because the original promissory note signed by Daniel Mercer in 1857 contains an arbitration clause in paragraph 3 of the second page that requires the note holder to offer arbitration prior to any seizure action. She held up the document. This clause was not offered, which means this auction cannot legally proceed. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a crowd that has just heard something it didn't expect and is trying to decide what to do with it. Pritchard's smile stayed exactly in place. May I see that document? He said in a tone that was not quite a question. You may see a copy. The original stays with me. She had made a copy that morning at the hotel by hand, word for word. She handed the copy to him. He took it. He read it. He kept his face arranged. This clause, he said slowly, was addressed in a supplementary agreement signed in 1868. I've seen every supplementary agreement in Caleb Mercer's accounts. There is no document waiving arbitration rights. The document exists. Then produce it. He looked at her. I don't carry every piece of bank paperwork in my coat pocket. No. But you had time to carry the seizure notice and the auction paperwork. Paperwork that benefits you travels quickly, Mr. Pritchard. She held his gaze. Show me the waiver, and I'll sit down. Someone in the crowd laughed, a short, sharp sound immediately suppressed. But it had happened. Pritchard's pleasant expression shifted by exactly 1 degree. Caleb was at the base of the steps. He had not come up. They had agreed without discussing it in those exact terms that the platform was Clara's territory, and his job was to hold the ground below it. He stood with his arms loose at his sides and watched the crowd the way a man watches a herd when the weather is changing, reading which way the pressure was going to move. He saw Martha Oates at the edge of the gathered people. She had come. She was standing very still, with her hands folded in front of her, watching the platform. He saw Thomas Beaumont, 3 people to her left. The young man's jaw was tight, and his eyes were fixed on Pritchard, with the concentrated fury of someone who has been holding on to something for a very long time and is trying to decide when to let it go. He saw Pete Harmon from the livery. He saw the hardware store owner who had known his father. He saw the woman from the dress shop who had once told him 6 months ago, when things were at their lowest, that she hoped it would come out right for him. None of them were saying anything yet, but they were listening. Pritchard handed the copy back to Clara. Miss Whitcomb, he said, and the pleasantness in his voice had dropped 1 register into something cooler and more careful. You are a woman who has been in this town for less than 24 hours. I have been managing the financial affairs of Red Hollow for 15 years. I suggest you consider very carefully whether you want to stand up in public and make accusations you cannot. I'm not making accusations, Clara said. I'm reading numbers. She reached into the satchel. This is your bank's record of Caleb Mercer's March 1877 payment, dated March 22nd. His receipt shows March 14th, 8 days earlier. That discrepancy generated $37 in penalty charges that should not exist. She held up the receipt. This is not an accusation. This is arithmetic. Clerical errors. This is the August 1877 entry. Compound interest applied retroactively to that penalty charge. She held up the page. This is the administrative fee charged in March 1878 for the recalculation, $12. She held up another page. When I run the actual numbers, Mr. Mercer has overpaid his original debt by $73. He does not owe this bank anything. The bank owes him. The crowd was very quiet. A man near the front 50s, weathered, wearing a hat Caleb recognized as belonging to a rancher named Gil Foster, who'd sold out 2 years ago, said without raising his voice very much, "How does a man overpay a debt and still get his land taken?" "Because," Clara said, looking out at the crowd rather than at Pritchard, "the debt was designed to be impossible to pay off. False penalty charges compound interest on those penalties, administrative fees on the recalculations. It looks like mathematics. It is not mathematics. It is a trap built out of language, and it was built deliberately because the men who built it understood that working people are too tired at the end of the day to spend their evenings reading fine print." Pritchard stepped forward. "This woman is not a lawyer. She is not a financial officer. She's right," said a voice from the crowd. Everyone turned. Martha Oates had stepped forward. She was not a large woman, and she did not have a loud voice, but she had the particular quality of someone who has decided that this is the moment and is not going to let it pass. "The same thing happened to my husband's note," she said. "Except my husband was dead, and his signature showed up on a loan anyway." The crowd went very still. Pritchard's jaw tightened, the first real crack in the arrangement of his face. "Mrs. Oates," he said, "you signed off on that transfer yourself. You were present at the closing." "I was present at a closing for a transaction I initiated," Martha said. "The second note, the one with my dead husband's name on it, I was never informed of. I never signed. My husband never signed. He had been in the ground for 6 weeks when that note was dated." She looked around at the people standing near her. "I have the original deed. I have my husband's last letter written 10 days before he died. The signatures don't match. They never matched." Her voice was steady. "I kept my mouth shut for 3 years because I didn't know who else it happened to. Now I do." Thomas Beaumont stepped forward. He was younger than Martha, and his voice shook slightly, but he did not stop. "My father's land," he said. "Elias Beaumont. He died in February of 1877. His name appeared on a deed transfer that August. I've been trying to get someone in this county to look at it for 2 years." He paused. "Nobody looked." "Because nobody wanted to look," said Gil Foster, the rancher in the front. "Someone else said, 'Pritchard owns the judge.' And that was the moment, not loud, not violent, but the moment when a crowd stops being a group of separate people and becomes something with a single pressure behind it all, pushing the same direction." Pritchard turned to the sheriff. "Connors, remove these people from the platform." Connors didn't move. "Dale." Pritchard's voice went harder. "Remove them." The sheriff looked at the crowd. He looked at Clara. He looked at Martha Oates, who was standing very straight and looking back at him with an expression that said she had been waiting a long time for someone in authority to decide which side of this they were on. "I'm not sure that's—" Connors started. "It's an order." "You don't give me orders," the sheriff said, and it came out quieter than he probably intended, but it came out, and once it was out, it stayed. Pritchard stared at him. Clara did not look at either of them. She was pulling another document from her satchel. "There is one more thing," she said, and the crowd turned back to her. She held up a single sheet of paper. "This is a sworn statement from Domingo Reyes, a cattle hand who worked in this county for 9 years. Mr. Reyes was informed by your bank that his wage records had been miscalculated and that he owed 4 months of wages back. He was then told when he attempted to dispute the claim that his work papers would face certain problems if he continued to make noise. She let that land. He left the county. A man who had worked this land for 9 years was run out of it for asking a question. And the question he was asking was the same question everyone standing here today should have been asking. Where did my money go?" She set the statement on the table. "I want to be clear about what this is," she said. "This is not one clerical error. This is not one difficult case. Across the accounts I have reviewed in the last 18 hours, I have found the same pattern in every one of them. False late charges, compound interest on penalties, administrative fees on recalculations, signatures appearing on documents after the signatories were dead. It is the same method. It is the same bank. It is the same man." She looked directly at Silas Pritchard. He was no longer smiling. "You can't prove intent," he said, and his voice had lost its pleasantness entirely down to the bare frame of it, which was not a nice frame at all. "I don't need to prove intent today," Clara said. "I need to prove pattern. A territorial judge with forensic examiners and subpoena power can prove intent. I have already sent a letter to the territorial marshal's office in Santa Fe. I sent it this morning." She paused. "Before I knew about the forged signatures." Someone in the crowd exhaled. It was almost a laugh, but not quite, which means, Clara continued, that by now the marshal's office has a letter describing falsified interest charges across multiple accounts in Red Hollow, New Mexico territory. And when a second letter arrives with evidence of forgery and the use of deceased individuals' signatures on financial documents, she let the sentence hang. Pritchard looked around him, at the crowd, at Connors, at the platform, at the stack of documents on the table. For the first time, he looked like a man recalculating. "This auction," he said, "is a legal proceeding. Whatever allegations this woman wants to make the debt is valid. The judge has signed the order and the seizure. Monsieur cannot proceed without offering arbitration," Clara said again, as specified in the original note. "That's not my opinion, Mr. Pritchard. That's the language your bank's predecessor agreed to in writing 22 years ago. The arbitration clause has never been waived, and the waiver document you claimed exists has not been produced." She looked at the auctioneer, a thin man who had been standing to the side of the platform, looking like he wanted to be anywhere else on earth. "Sir, in the absence of a valid arbitration waiver, do you believe you have legal authority to conduct this auction today?" The auctioneer opened his mouth, closed it, looked at Pritchard. "I'm asking you," Clara said gently. "Not him." The auctioneer swallowed. "I would need the bank's legal counsel to confirm the validity of the—" "Then I suggest we wait for the bank's legal counsel," Clara said to the crowd as much as to him. "Which means this auction is postponed." What happened next happened fast. Pritchard moved not toward Clara, not yet, but toward the auctioneer, putting himself between the man and the crowd, dropping his voice to something low and urgent. Clara could not hear the words, but she could read the posture pressure threat instruction. The auctioneer looked at the crowd, then at Clara, then at Pritchard's hand on his arm. He said very clearly, "I can't conduct this sale today, not with a legal dispute on the record in front of witnesses." Pritchard's hand dropped. He turned, and now the pleasantness was entirely gone. Not just reduced gone, and what was underneath was older and harder, and considerably less patient. "You," he said to Clara, "do you have any idea what you have done today?" "I have stopped an illegal property seizure," she said, "and filed a report with the territorial marshal. Yes, I have a reasonable idea." "You have made an enemy," he said, "in a town that is mine." "It is not yours," Clara said. "It belongs to the people standing in it. It always did. You just convinced them otherwise." She did not look away from him. "And I am not afraid of you, Mr. Pritchard. I want to say that plainly in front of everyone here, so there is no confusion later. Whatever comes next, you should know that going in." Pritchard stared at her. Then he reached into his coat. It happened in a fraction of a second, the slight shift of his shoulder, the downward movement of his hand, and Caleb was moving before the thought finished forming, coming up the platform steps in 2 strides, putting himself between Clara and Pritchard, with the controlled total economy of a man who has made the decision before the moment required it. "Don't," Caleb said. His voice was very quiet. Pritchard's hand stopped. The crowd had gone absolutely still. The kind of still that has no sound at all, not even breathing you can hear. Pritchard and Caleb looked at each other. Behind Caleb, Clara had not moved, had not flinched. But her hand had closed around the satchel strap and her knuckles were white. "You'd defend her," Pritchard said, very low. "After everything I've taken from you. You'd stand there and defend the woman who just made your life 10 times more complicated." "She didn't make my life complicated," Caleb said. "You did, 11 years ago when you decided my land was easier to take than to earn." He kept his body exactly where it was. "And yeah, I'd defend her, because what she just did took more courage than anything I've seen in this county in a long time, and you know it. Which is why your hand went to your coat." Pritchard looked at him for a long-held moment. Then he took his hand out of his coat. Empty. He stepped back. He straightened. He put the pleasant expression back on like a man putting on a coat he no longer needs to feel the weather, mechanical, deliberate, without warmth. "This is not finished," he said. "No," Clara said from behind Caleb's shoulder. "It is not. But it has started. And starting was the part you were counting on us not doing." The crowd did not cheer. That happened in stories, sometimes the moment of triumph, the rising voices, the release. But real crowds in real towns don't work that way, especially when the man being challenged has been the most powerful person in the county for 15 years, and will likely still be in that county tomorrow. What happened instead was quieter and more permanent. People looked at each other. Martha Oates walked up to the platform steps and looked at Clara and said, "What do we do now?" "We document everything," Clara said. "Every account, every name, every payment record anyone here still has. We give it all to the marshal when he arrives." "And if Pritchard gets to the marshal first?" someone called from the crowd. "That's why there are 12 of us," Clara said, "and not one." Gil Foster, the rancher in the front, took off his hat. He held it against his chest. He looked at Caleb. "I sold out," he said. 18 months ago. I thought it was the only way. Took what they offered because I couldn't fight the math." He looked at Clara. "If there's a case, if the marshal comes, is there anything that can—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I can't promise your land comes back," Clara said. "I won't say that to you. But what I can promise is that what was done to you will be on record, and the people who did it will answer for it, in a courtroom, under oath." She paused. "That's not everything you lost. I know that. But it's something they never intended for you to have." The rancher nodded. He put his hat back on. What? Pritchard left the platform with 2 of his men and did not look back. The sheriff watched him go. Connors stood at the base of the steps for a moment, then he looked up at Caleb. "I've been sheriff here 9 years, Connors said. Caleb waited. "I knew something was wrong," Connors said. "I told myself it wasn't my business. Bank business. Legal matters. I told myself—" He stopped. "I told myself a lot of things." "Yeah," Caleb said. "So did I. I'm not—" The sheriff paused. "I don't know how much use I am at this point. But if there are statements the marshal needs, if there are things I witnessed—" He paused again. "I kept a journal. 11 years. Because I knew someday someone was going to ask, and I wanted to have the truth somewhere." He looked at Clara. I don't know if it helps. Clara looked at him for a long moment. A sheriff's contemporaneous journal, she said carefully. Documenting 9 years of bank activities in this county could be one of the most significant pieces of evidence in this case. Connors nodded, slowly. Then I'll get it, he said. He unpinned his badge. He looked at it. He pinned it back on, not to the same spot, slightly different, like a man adjusting something he needs to wear differently going forward, and walked away down the street. Clara watched him go. Caleb came to stand beside her at the platform railing. The crowd was starting to move now, people gathering in small groups, talking in voices too low to carry the specific sound of a town reconsidering itself. You got the sheriff, Caleb said. The sheriff got himself, Clara said. You think Pritchard's going to come back tonight? I think Pritchard is already planning his next move. Yes. She looked down at her satchel, at everything inside it. Which is why tonight we work, and we don't stop. He looked at her profile, at the set of her jaw, and the steadiness of her hands, and the way she was already thinking 3 steps beyond the moment they were standing, in the way she had been thinking 3 steps ahead since the moment she stepped off that coach yesterday morning. Clara, he said. When this is done, when the marshal comes and the case is filed, and whenever this is done. He paused. I'd still like you to stay. She turned to look at him. He had his hat in his hands, now held against his chest, the same way Gil Foster had held his, not performative, just the gesture of a man who means what he's saying and wants his hands free to say it. Not because of the marriage arrangement, he said. Not because of the contract. Because you came here, and in 18 hours you gave 12 people something they'd stopped believing they could have. He paused. And I'd like to see what you'd do with more time. Clara looked at him for a moment. Ask me again, she said, when this is done. I want to answer it when I'm not also thinking about the territorial marshal and Silas Pritchard's next move, and whether there are more accounts I haven't seen yet. He almost smiled. The closest thing she had seen from him. Fair enough, he said. He put his hat back on. And from across the street, in the window of the First Territorial Bank of Red Hollow, Silas Pritchard stood and watched them both, and his face was the face of a man who has spent 15 years building something and is standing in the moment when he first understands it might actually fall. He was not afraid yet, but he was starting to be. And starting was the part none of them had expected. Pritchard moved that night. Clara expected it. She had said so, and she had meant it, and she had spent the hours after the auction platform not celebrating, but preparing, going through what remained in her satchel, organizing every document into a sequence a marshal could follow without her explaining each step. Writing marginal notes in her careful handwriting that turned the pile of evidence into a story anyone with working eyes could read. Caleb sat across from her at the kitchen table and did not pretend to do anything else. He watched the window. He drank coffee. When she needed a document she had not quite reached, he handed it over without being asked. At 9:47 in the evening, someone threw a rock through the front window of the hotel. Not the ranch. The hotel. Where she was not. Caleb heard about it at 10 past 10 from Pete Harmon, who came up the ranch road on horseback with his hat pushed back and his voice tight. They broke the window of the room they thought you were in, Pete said. Manager told them you'd taken a room on the 2nd floor. You hadn't. I stayed at the ranch, Clara said from the doorway. Pete looked at her. Yeah, I figured that out. He caught his breath. It was 2 men. Nobody could see their faces in the dark. Connors went out there, but... He paused. But Connors is still figuring out which version of himself he is right now. He didn't push too hard. He'll get there, Clara said. Maybe. Or maybe Pritchard's already gotten to him again. No, she said. He keeps a journal, Pete. A man who keeps a journal of things he's ashamed of is a man who intends eventually to be on the right side of them. Pete looked at her for a moment. How do you know things like that about people you just met? I don't know them. I read what's in front of me. She stepped back from the doorway. Come in. Tell me everything they said to the hotel manager. The marshal arrived on the third day. His name was Amos Garrett, and he was nothing like what the word marshal conjured in Clara's imagination. Not large, not loud, not wearing his authority the way some men wear a new coat to be seen. He was a lean, quiet man in his late 40s, with dust from the road still on his jacket, and eyes that moved through a room the way Clara's moved through a ledger, methodically missing nothing, assigning weight to things before he spoke about them. He came to the ranch first, not to the bank, not to the sheriff's office, to the ranch. Clara understood why. The letter she had sent 3 days ago had told him where the evidence lived. She had the table cleared and the documents arranged by the time he sat down. She walked him through it the same way she would have walked her father through a complicated set of accounts, plainly without drama, letting the numbers carry the argument because numbers properly laid out require no theatrical assistance. Garrett listened without interrupting for 40 minutes. When she finished, he sat back and looked at the table. "How long have you been in Red Hollow?" he said. "This is day 3. He looked at her, then at Caleb, who was standing against the wall the way he always stood when Clara was working, present, quiet, ready. "Mr. Mercer," he said, "did you know about the arbitration clause in your father's original note?" "No, sir. I didn't know to look for it." "But she did." "Within the first hour," Caleb said. Garrett looked back at Clara. "You have the forged promissory note, the Oates document. I have the original. Martha Oates gave it to me directly." "And the sheriff's journal?" "Connors brought it to me yesterday morning. 9 years of entries. He wrote down more than he probably should have for a man who told himself it wasn't his business." She paused. "That journal has dates, names, and 3 separate references to conversations between Pritchard and the circuit judge that Connors personally witnessed." Garrett was quiet for a moment. "The circuit judge," he said, "is Judge Harold Vance." "Yes. Harold Vance has been on the territorial bench for 12 years. I know. What you are describing, if it holds up, is not just bank fraud. It is judicial corruption at the circuit court level." He looked at her steadily. "You understand what you've handed me?" "I understand what I found," Clara said. "What you do with it is your domain, not mine. But yes, I understand what it is." Garrett pressed his hands flat on the table. He looked at the documents. He looked at the window. He looked at Caleb. "I'm going to need sworn depositions from every person you've spoken to," he said. "Mrs. Oates, Thomas Beaumont, the livery man, all of them. And I'm going to need to move quickly, because the moment Pritchard finds out a marshal is in this county, things will start disappearing." "He already knows," Clara said. "He's had 3 days to figure out what I sent. Whatever he planned to make disappear is probably gone." "Probably," Garrett agreed. "But he couldn't have known about Connor's journal, or the original note, because those are here." He put his hand on the table, not on the documents, but near them, like a man staking a claim. "I'm going to need you to hold on to these, personally. Not in a bank, not in a hotel room, not anywhere he can get to them without going through you." "They haven't left my satchel since the auction," Clara said. He almost smiled. "Good." He stood. "I'll start with Mrs. Oates. I'll need you to come with me, having you present. When I take her statement will help establish the chain of evidence." He looked at Caleb. "And you stay visible. Don't hide out here. Pritchard needs to see that nothing that happened at that auction has changed the way you move through this town." Caleb nodded. "That I can do." They took 4 depositions that afternoon. Martha Oates sat across from Marshal Garrett and spoke for an hour and a quarter, without breaking and without softening a single word of it. When she described the day she was told her dead husband had signed a new promissory note, she said it the same way she had said it to Clara 3 days ago. Level contained carrying the particular dignity of a woman who made peace with her grief a long time ago and is not going to perform it for anyone's benefit. When she finished, Garrett set down his pen and said, "Mrs. Oates, I want to be honest with you about what this process will involve." "I know what it'll involve," she said. "Lawyers who talk too long." Men in courtrooms who act like the word widow means foolish. People who weren't here suggesting I might be misremembering. She looked at him. I've been remembering it correctly for 3 years, Marshal. I'll manage a few more months. Garrett looked at Clara. Clara said nothing. She had learned that some moments did not need commentary. Thomas Beaumont was next briefer. Harder in a different way, the compressed fury of a young man who had been told no too many times and was only now being heard. He signed his statement with a hand that was completely steady, which told Clara something about the kind of person he was going to be when this was over. Pete Harmon gave his statement quickly and accurately, and then said before he left, "Domingo Reyes is going to want to know when this goes to court." "It may be several months," Garrett said. "He'll want to know anyway. He should hear it from someone who's on his side." Pete looked at Clara. "You wrote him a letter. He'll know you're real." "I'll write him again," she said, "when there's more to say." The arrest happened the next morning. Clara was not there for it. Not because she was excluded, but because Garrett had told her the night before that her presence at Pritchard's arrest would make her a target for every one of his lawyers to attack, and that the strongest thing she could be in the months ahead was a clean, unimpeachable witness who had done everything through proper channels and nothing that could be characterized as personal. She stayed at the ranch and waited, and the waiting was the hardest thing she had done in 4 days. Harder than the ledgers, harder than the platform, harder even than the night she had sat alone with a lamp burning low and 3 letters in front of her and no certainty at all that any of it would work. Caleb went to town. He came back at 10:30 in the morning and walked in the door and sat down at the kitchen table and looked at his hands for a long moment before he spoke. "Pritchard's in custody," he said. Clara set down her pen. "And the judge?" "Vance resigned this morning, before Garrett could get to him. Connors said he had his bags packed last night." A pause. "He's gone, left the territory." "A resignation doesn't erase what he did." "No, but it means Garrett has to track him down before he can face charges." "Which?" Caleb's jaw was tight. "Which means he may not answer for it the way he should." "He will answer for it," Clara said. "Maybe not today. Maybe not in the way that feels right. But judicial corruption in a federal territory is a federal matter, and federal matters have long memories." Caleb looked at her. "You believe that?" "I believe that the record exists now, and records outlast the people who made them." She folded her hands. "What about the bank?"